The road to Mayhem. The sun had barely stretched its lazy fingers across the horizon when Sonder found Arion wrestling with a large, old, patched-up cloth sack, bursting at the seams and with shoulder straps barely holding on. Among the items spilling out were a carpenter's tools and the legs of a workbench, definitely not original to the sack. His father's worn-out flute, a faded piece of embroidered cloth from his mother, and the famous thin rope crown they had woven for Arion, which he couldn't wear yet, as it was too wide. "Arion, my boy," Sonder raised an eyebrow, "are these military school supplies? Or are you trying to smuggle contraband into a market?" Arion, lost beneath the sack, spoke with difficulty, barely breathing. "Humph," he grunted, trying to lift the sack. For a moment, he lost his balance and swayed from side to side. Something inside the sack clattered like a bucket full of nails rolling around. When he finally lost his balance and toppled onto the dry straw, scattering it everywhere, thump. "Just necessary items, Master. What's left of your broken old workbench? We can fix and sell it. And my parents' mementos. I can't be without them." Sonder, realizing Arion had no belongings of his own, looked at the size of the sack. He knew this sack was his life. Sonder took a deep breath. "All right. Listen to me, future lieutenant. With these necessary items, it wouldn't be smart to tire yourself out before the exams on this 2-day journey. They will only weigh you down and make you tired. Why don't you leave them at my house? I'll handle them, and you can just focus on your exams." Arion's eyes widened. But they... "No buts," Sonder said, pulling the enormous sack from Arion's back with surprising ease. "You just take care of yourself. I'll leave these in a safe place. Come on now, we still have to get to a demanding military academy." As the sack swung lightly on Sonder's arm, Arion felt a strange lightness for a moment. Along the road out of town, they had stealthily escaped the guards who had been after Arion the previous night for trespassing. The soldiers were hotly searching for them at the city's exit, but Arion and Sonder had skillfully covered their tracks. Their journey was a series of minor disasters. Thanks to Arion, he tripped over his own feet on flat ground, got into an argument with a stubborn donkey about the meaning of forward progress, and once, trying to jump over a tiny puddle, managed to fall right into a much larger and muddier one. Finding the woven crown tied to his wrist in the bushes, Sonder merely sighed, walking a respectful distance behind him to avoid splashes. He hadn't grumbled this much since the last war council. On the first night of their journey, they stopped by a small stream. While Sonder quickly fell asleep, Arion began to stir in his sleep. Drowsy, he had gotten up to relieve himself. However, in the dark, he must have miscalculated, as instead of the bushes, he soaked Sonder. Startled by the water splashed on his face, Sonder suddenly bolted upright and bellowed, "Arion!" Arion darted into the trees, like the rabbit he'd seen on the road that morning, full of fear and regret. "I'm sorry, I was so sleepy. Ah!" he fled. As Sonder sighed deeply and washed his face, Arion chuckled to himself, drowsily. Another morning, Arion tried to hunt a rabbit for breakfast, but due to his clumsiness, the rabbit managed to escape by crashing into the porridge Sonder had carefully prepared over the fire, splattering it everywhere. Sonder's patience was tested once again. A few days later, they reached the outskirts of a bustling city, their mandatory stop. "Hungry, future lieutenant?" Sonder asked, looking at a street vendor's stall filled with sizzling skewers. Before Arion could even begin to explain the state of his stomach, Sonder handed a few coins to the vendor. "Some of this and some of that and a drink. There's no point in taking difficult exams on an empty stomach." Arion, eyes wide, devoured the skewers like a hungry badger, occasionally offering half-chewed pieces to Sander, who gently refused, trying not to grimace. Sander had also ordered a bowl of rice for him, which Arion eagerly consumed. Sander's generous feeding of Arion was less about exam strength and more a testament to his affection. From there, they set off and arrived at the area where the exams would take place. Inside, the completely humiliating obstacle course awaited them, involving crawling through mud, jumping over logs, and more. It was, Sander was absolutely sure, a vast mixture of ropes, walls, and mud pits designed to make young soldiers question their life choices. Around them, other people watched the performance of these young men with curiosity. From a distance, it was possible to see some commanders invited to the opening, secretly bowing to Sander. Arion plunged forward with the eagerness of a puppy chasing its own tail, heedless in his pure exhilaration. The first task was to evade one of the academy's instructors. Arion began to play, jumping from side to side around his opponent. "Ha, hop, you can't see me, huh? Ha, catch me if you can," he boasted. When suddenly, he ran into one of the logs fixed to the ground. The instructor calmly lifted him by the scruff of his neck, just like carrying a kitten. In the second test, he slipped off a greasy log and tumbled into a cabbage-smelling pit. In the third test, lying on his back in the mud, he gave Sander a thumbs up. Then he got tangled in rope nets. Sander tried not to laugh at Arion along with everyone else, feeling his cheeks ache from suppressed laughter. "Good job, you can finish this exam too." The last task was a mental logic puzzle. Arion, surprisingly, started well, but then he saw a question whose answer he didn't know. "I can't, Sander," he whispered. "My mind just can't grasp it." Sander, observing from a distance, saw the familiar spark in Arion's eyes dim. "Think of Lyra, Arion," Sander murmured, just loud enough to be heard. Arion's head suddenly snapped up. His blurred eyes suddenly cleared, as if a cloud had lifted from a misty bog. A foolish but immensely determined grin spread across his face. He grabbed his pen and wrote quickly. Despite all the setbacks, for better or worse, he had managed to finish the exams. He emerged from the last exam with an ink stain on his nose. After a while, the results began to be announced. As the list was read, Sander and Arion had desperately set off to return to the village, when at the end of the list, the officer clearly shouted, "Last person, Private Arion, Arion son of Lunam." The two looked at each other in disbelieving astonishment. When the officer called out again, Sander and Arion suddenly sprang up and took flight, embracing each other with joy and shouting merrily. Then they suddenly stopped and shrugged as if everything was perfectly normal. Sander cleared his throat and mumbled as coolly as possible, "Of course, we were expecting it." That evening, Sander ordered a lavish feast of buttery rice and grilled meats at the city's best restaurant to celebrate Arion's acceptance. Throughout the meal, Sander's face held a strange seriousness. "Listen to me, Private," he said, looking into Arion's eyes. "You're starting a new life here. Never trust anyone. Don't tell anyone your secret. If you do, they'll hurt you badly, understand? Find friends, but always be vigilant." He frowned, but there was deep affection in his eyes. "Eat well, don't catch a cold, and always be careful." Just like a father, he spoke at length about all of Arion's basic needs and protection from dangers. "We did it, Sander," he cheered, hitting his friend's back with enough force to make Sander briefly forget his legendary composure. "I couldn't have done it without you, and without Lyra, of course. Her spirit guided my hand. And I'll tell you one more thing," Sander said, a proud smile appearing on his face, though his eyes were moist. Struggling with these complex emotions, he cleared his throat and looked at Arion one last time. The whole point of this exam was to find out who could endure until the very end, and who had the courage to wrestle with an adult many times their size. You endured. You did it. Arion's eyes watered slightly. I never give up, Master. That was the answer to the last question anyway. Now, Sonder murmured, it's time to go. That night, they stood at the threshold of the school's imposing gates, where Sonder had secretly spoken to the head and entrusted Arion. The moon cast the bright promise of a new beginning onto the school's stone walls. "Are you ready, Arion?" Sonder asked, his voice slightly choked. Arion nodded, with new excitement in his eyes. "I'm ready, Master." Sonder hugged Arion tightly. "Be strong, be brave, and never give up." "Are you crying, Master?" "I'm just feeling a bit sorry for the officials who'll have to deal with you and your sense of humour," lied sarcastically. As Arion took his first step towards the barracks, Sonder turned around. He silently wiped a tear from his eye, definitely just dust. As he exited the city gates, he didn't look back once. Though tears streamed from his eyes, his steps were resolute. Sander's path led back to the small town he had shared with Arion.